well, hey everybody. There you go, technology. Good to be with you here in the room. Hopefully you can see me online. It is good to be with you. I want you to know, as we launch into a brand new series, I'm excited and I'm expectant about what God is going to do in our lives and in the life of our church as we study together the book of Colossians. See, that's what we're going to start today, and over these next 4 weeks, we're going to be working our way, not verse by verse, but chapter by chapter through this important letter. Originally, it was written by the Apostle Paul, originally written to followers of Jesus in this specific city, a city called Colossae. A very small group of followers of Jesus had gathered. They'd started to worship Christ, and Paul is now writing them to help them on their way in this journey. We find that there is a theme to this letter, and it's pretty direct, it's pretty specific, and it's this theme that we're going to unpack over the next 4 weeks. You might want to write this down. Here's the message of Colossians in just a few words. Jesus plus nothing equals everything. Again, just make a note of that. This is what we're going to look at over these coming 4 weeks. That Jesus plus nothing, like there's nothing you can add to Christ. There's no other thing, nothing necessary. It's Jesus alone equals everything for us. That's what we're going to look at over these coming weeks. It's important because this little equation that we kind of came up with, but I think this equation is important because if it's true, now you need to decide for yourselves if it's true, Jesus plus nothing equals everything. But if it's true, this little equation, it should change everything about everything for our life. If it's true, it should change our purpose, should change our perspective. By the way, I had an eye surgery last Friday. I can't see you. I can't even see my notes. So if you're thinking, he's not looking at his notes today, that's probably why. But it should change how we view things, right? Our perspective. And it should change what we pursue, why we work, who we interact with, how we interact with them, how we face trials, how we face sickness, how we face death and life. See, here's what I know. Your view of Jesus, it impacts every area of your life. And I love how the 19th century pastor and author, theologian A.W. Tozer puts it. Tozer says, what comes to our mind when we think about God is the most important thing about us. You see, your view of Jesus, it impacts every area of your life, whether you know it or not. So I want you to keep that in your mind as we jump into this study. If you've got your Bible, pull it out. It's New Testament. Find the book of Colossians. That's what we're going to be. Today we're going to look at Colossians chapter 1. And there are a few things that you need to understand about this letter. Just 3 things before we jump into the letter itself. First, I said this already, written by the Apostle Paul, but he was actually writing during one of his many imprisonments in Rome. And he's writing to this group of followers of Jesus. Paul met Jesus on the road to Damascus, and he refused to stop telling everybody that Jesus is Lord, that Jesus had, in fact, raised from the dead. And so people kept throwing Paul into prison. This is one of those letters that Paul is now writing. He was redeeming the time, so to speak, right? He's making the most of his time, kind of shackled in prison. This is one of Paul's prison epistles. That's the first thing you need to know about this letter. Here's the second, pretty important. Paul never met these people. He never met the Colossians. He's writing to a letter to a group of people that he actually had never met himself. Paul had shared Christ with this man named Epaphras in a city called Ephesus. Subsequently, Paul disciples Epaphras for 2 years in this city, Ephesus. It's like a tongue twister, right? Epaphras, Ephesus, Ephesus. Try to say that 10 times fast, right? But Paul sends his disciple Epaphras to the city of Colossae. And Epaphras is the one who starts the church in this city. You see, that's the point, because Paul is writing to this group of people that he hasn't met because his friend Epaphras has told them they've got a challenge. They're struggling with this kind of theological idea. They've got Christological heresy going on. Any idea what that could be, Christological heresy? Just kind of a theological fancy way of saying they don't really understand who Jesus is, right? These followers of Jesus don't really get his power. They don't understand his authority. They're struggling to understand, even at the most basic level, the deity of Christ. It's part of why Paul writes this letter. There's one more thing. The third thing, this is a straightforward letter. There's no guessing. Paul is coming at us with kind of two primary points. Two primary concerns of this letter. Number one, he's concerned that the culture of Colossae, this city, has actually infiltrated the church, confused the Christians' view of Jesus. And second, Paul is concerned that these followers of Jesus don't understand why he keeps getting thrown into prison. Why is he suffering? Why is he in jail if he's actually a messenger of God? Surely bad things don't happen if you place your faith in Christ. That's part of why Paul is writing this letter, to correct that type of thinking. It's the context of Colossians. Message is pretty simple. Jesus plus nothing equals everything. That's what we're going to consider for 4 weeks. There is a question that I want us to think about today, though, and it's this. Is Jesus first in your life? Maybe he was first at a point, maybe, a few years ago. Is he today, Jesus, first in your life? We'll consider this together. Colossians chapter 1. Don't have time to read every single verse, like I said, so we'll start in verse 15 today. Let's look at that together. Here's what the Apostle Paul says. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all of his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, making peace through his blood shed on the cross. See, Jesus plus nothing, it equals everything. Because Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Because by him all things were created on heaven and on earth. He is before all things. Jesus is holding all things together. Jesus plus nothing equals everything, because God was pleased to have all of the fullness of the deity, the power, the authority of God dwell in his Son. And through Jesus to reconcile all things to himself. Jesus plus nothing equals everything. In our run through, they were saying, you're saying that too much. But I want you to walk out of here thinking to yourself, there is nothing I can add to the power of God, the power of Jesus in me. Nothing. Jesus plus, I'm just going to keep saying it. Jesus plus nothing equals everything. You see, there was a problem in the city of Colossae with this equation. And the problem was that the people, the followers of Jesus, weren't acting like this is true. I think they believed that it's true, but they weren't living it out. They weren't kind of fleshing this out in the reality of their day-to-day life. Could have been because Colossae was a prosperous city. It's located in modern-day Turkey, part of the Roman Empire. You might know, you might not know, that the Romans kind of had two philosophies, two ideas when it came to religion in the Roman Empire. Number one, you could choose to worship any god you want. No problem with the Romans. But number two, you just can't talk about it. Right? Worship any God you want, but number two, don't talk about it because that could be offensive. That could kind of rub or irritate people the wrong way. Sound familiar? Anybody? Just saying, right? That was the Romans, though. As with most cities in the Roman Empire, Colossae, it was filled with lots of different shrines to all these different gods, right? Because the Romans were proponents that you go find any god that works for you. Or you find kind of, I'll take this one, and I'll take this one, and oh, this one looks good. I'll put this god in kind of my deity mix, right? And I'll walk around with this kind of like group of gods that seems to work for me. You can kind of think about it. Anybody like the buffet once upon a time? I used to love the buffet. I don't really like it anymore, but apparently there was a buffet, hometown buffet. Was that in Cleveland? Hometown. Think about it like that, where you can go through the line and kind of choose anything that you'd like. That was the theology of Colossae. I've heard it called the Build-A-Bear theology. Maybe you don't like the buffet, but you like Build-A-Bear. Come on. Right? You can go assemble however you want a smorgasbord of gods, right? You put them together, all these different philosophies, as long as it makes you feel good. That's the landscape of the Colossian culture. And it's the problem for these followers of Jesus. First century, right? Nobody's gone before them. They've got nowhere to look for an example. The problem for these followers of Jesus is that culture had infiltrated the church. That is their issue. It's why Paul is writing. It's the issue that he's trying to correct in these first century followers of Jesus. Not that we can relate, right? Not that you or I would ever be tempted to trust something or someone to add something to the power of God, the power of Jesus in our life. You see, if I think about my own journey and I think about my own faith, this is a challenge for me sometimes. Sometimes I'm tempted to kind of trust in myself. I think this is a challenge in our culture. Challenge for me, I'm guessing it's a challenge for you. In a culture that tells us that we are what we have. Spent a lot of time talking about this a few months ago, actually. In a culture that wants us to believe that we are what we can do. That we are what other people have to say about us. Even though you go to church, even though you read your Bible, even though you love Jesus, it's easy in our culture to start to feel, to start to act and live like we need to validate ourselves. I don't know if you ever feel like that. I asked a similar question before, but do you ever feel like you need to validate your worth? I think this is something we need to think about. That's why I'm asking you again. Like maybe you're a mom and you're constantly comparing yourself to other moms. Maybe you're always evaluating your perceived value at your company, or maybe it's your leadership skills, or you're a student, or you're a friend, and you're just always kind of measuring yourself against everyone else. You see, in our culture, it's so easy to feel the pressure to validate our worth. It's not just an issue in our culture. 2,000 years ago, this is what the people of Colossae are dealing with. It's why Paul is writing this letter. Here's what we need to understand. You want to experience the fullness of God, the power and authority of God in your life, you've got to understand that Jesus, and Jesus alone, is the only validation that you need. It's a very simple point, I know, but Jesus plus nothing equals everything. Look at John 1:1. It says, "In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. Jesus was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made." You see, nothing in all of creation. Let's try to wrap we can't. Wrap your minds, wrap your hearts around this idea. There is nothing that exists outside of Jesus. Hebrews 1:2 says, "In these last days, God has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. So Jesus created all things, and for Jesus, all things exist. He sustains all things. 1 Chronicles 29, verse 11, it says, "To him be the power, to him be the glory, to him be the victory, to him be the majesty." I could keep reading, but I won't. We get the idea that Jesus plus nothing equals everything. And this idea, it should absolutely, fundamentally change everything about how we exist and how we live. And yet the problem is that some of us have Jesus, but Jesus doesn't have you. I want you to think about that. Some of us, we have prayed a prayer and we've asked Jesus to be a part of our life, but we haven't allowed him to actually grab hold of us and shape and form who we are. You see, the question is Jesus first in your life? An important question to answer in the culture that we live in, where often at least one of the most significant things on the planet is us. I was reminded of this. There's lots of reminders out there, but reminded of this a few years ago. I was at a Cavs game. Any Cavs fans? I'm believing they're going to have a great season. Remember, though, a few years ago when we went to the finals 4 years in a row? That was awesome, right? And we won the championship 2016. Like all these people, was it like 1 million people, got together downtown Cleveland. We were celebrating. I wasn't there. My son was just born, but it was awesome. And during those years, you might remember there was actually a Cavs player that was a part of our church. And his wife sung on our worship team very regularly. And my family became quite good friends with his family. Had kids similar age, we have similar backgrounds. And so Jenny, my wife, and I, we would often go to Cavs games during that season as a guest of Kyle Korver. That was the player. And we were close, and you might have noticed I had this badge on. You might have been wondering, why is Aaron wearing this weird badge that says the Cavs V.I.P. access? Now, I got to be honest. We made this. I threw away all the badges that I ever got, but every single game, I just had to be truthful, right, transparent. Every single game, it was cool because Jenny and I, we would get this V.I.P. badge. That's what it said on the thing. Wasn't hard to make it, actually. You should try it if you want to go to a Cavs game. The thing about the badge was it was cool because we would put it around our neck, and we'd drive down. I don't remember what the arena was called at that time. Was it the Q? I don't know what it was. But we'd drive down there, and we would pull around and under because the Cavs players park in this secret underground parking. And we would pull up to the underground parking. We would raise our badge, and boom, we are in. We were driving this little silver Mini Cooper at the time. Back then, and we would pull right in between LeBron James' Lamborghini and Kevin Love's Rolls Royce, right, and our little Mini Cooper. It was awesome. And we would walk through the secret players' entrance into this room for the families, where the families would be hanging out. There'd be all this food, and we would, anywhere we wanted to go, literally, we flashed the badge, and we're off. Like, we go anywhere we want in the entire arena, and I'm not going to lie to you, it was great. Like, we loved it. It was super fun, and it was cool to have the badge. But the truth is, the badge made you feel special. See, that's why it was so good to have the badge. Not just because you could go anywhere, because it made you feel important. Like, the badge made you feel like you had some kind of power and authority in that place. So one day, I'm sitting in the game, and we went to a lot of games in that time. Sitting at the game, and I'm looking at my badge. I'm thinking, man, it's great to have the badge. And I noticed something. Do you know what I noticed? You might not see it here. My name was nowhere on the badge. Right? I'm looking at this thing, and it says VIP Kyle Korver. right? The whole time I'm thinking that this is my badge, right? And it was my badge, but I wasn't actually the VIP at the Cavs game. I was a guest of. I was there on the authority and the ability and the power of my friend. His name was Kyle. It was very nice of him to invite me. It was very nice of him to get me this VIP badge. You see, it wasn't my ability, but here's the thing, I had the badge. And that's what makes all the difference. It verified, it validated, it substantiated my presence. It's the same with the power of God in us. And in our remaining few minutes, I want us to think about that. Look at Matthew 28:18. Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. 1 Peter 1:3 says, his divine power has given us everything we need for life, everything we need for godliness through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and his own goodness. We all like to feel special. We like to feel significant. But this is the message of the gospel, and it's so important to understand in the culture that we live in that Jesus, he's the real VIP. And it might seem kind of cheesy, it might seem kind of cliche, but this is the truth of the gospel message, that Jesus plus nothing equals everything for you and for I. It's the message that Paul is sharing with these new Christians in the city of Colossae. Men and women, they've come to know Jesus through Epaphras. They're struggling to understand what is the power of Jesus and what position should Jesus actually have in our lives. We're going to look at this over the next 4 weeks. We've got a few minutes. So in our remaining time, let me give you 3 reasons today to make Jesus first in your life. And these are going to come straight from the text. So we're walking through the chapter, not verse by verse, but through the chapter, Colossians chapter 1. So straight from Colossians 1, 3 reasons why I believe Paul is saying you got to make Jesus first in your life. Here's reason number 1. Jesus is firstborn. Look at Colossians 1:15. Paul says Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Let's talk about this word, firstborn. It's an important word. And I just want you to make a mental note. If a Jehovah's Witness ever comes to your door, if a Mormon ever comes to your door, nothing against these people. If a Muslim if somebody of a different faith ever comes to your door, this word is the key, firstborn. This is the key to sharing your faith in Christ and why Jesus is so significant, why he is like no one else, no other God, the word firstborn. Sometimes it can confuse us, right? That Jesus is the firstborn over all creation. And sometimes we start to think that Jesus is the first thing that God created. Right? And you might think in human terms, like when I say that Noah, our son, is the first thing that Jenny and I created. In 2015, he did not exist. In 2016, he did exist. But what we need to understand about the word that is being used here, this word firstborn, is that it also means position. It is directly where we get the idea of the word prototype. So as you think about this word, Paul is not saying that Jesus was the first thing that God created. He's saying that Jesus is the prototype of all creation. You see, Jesus is the template on which all things have been created, and the one for whom all things exist. So I'll ask you a kind of weighty question. Why do you exist? Why do you do the things that you do? Pretty big question. Why do you work? Why do you go to school? Why do you parent? Why do you do all the different activities, fun things that we get to do, golfing, skiing, whatever it is? Why do you do these things? Paul says that you were created by Jesus and for his purposes. That's why you're here. It's the most direct way that we can say it. Listen to how Paul puts it, Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. Paul says, the life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself up for me. You see, Jesus is the firstborn. He's the prototype of creation. You exist for him. It's why you're here. It's so important to understand, because if you don't understand that your life here on earth is for Christ, that you exist for him, if you don't find your purpose and find the will of God for your life, you will never be satisfied. You will never be fulfilled on earth, no matter what you have. Doesn't matter what title you get, no matter where you live, what car you drive. Doesn't matter if you play on the Cleveland Cavaliers basketball team. If you don't seek out Christ and find his purpose for you, you're never going to be satisfied. That's the first reason to make Jesus first in your life. Jesus is firstborn, not first created, but he is the prototype. Here's reason number 2. Jesus is supreme. Look at verse 18. Paul says Jesus is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. Remember, Jesus is not one of many created things. Jesus is the creating force. Jesus is the purpose behind all things. And so Paul is saying that Jesus is supreme. It's this Greek word proteon. Here's what it means. This is literally what it means. It means first. This word, it literally means that Jesus has first place. That is who he is. He, by his nature, is first. He's supreme. But in our culture, we don't like to share that position, do we? Makes me wonder if you ever forget, if you're a Christ follower, do you ever forget that Jesus is first in all things? No matter if you put him first in your life or not, he is still first. By his nature, that is who he is. You see, I don't know where you're at today. Maybe you've experienced a loss. Maybe you've experienced a challenge in your marriage. Maybe you're going through a difficulty with your children. Maybe finances are tight. Lots of things that we navigate this side of heaven. I don't know where you are today, and I don't know what you're going through. But the reason that there's so much hope in this message is because Jesus is supreme over your life. He is first. No matter if you make him first or not, he has first place because he has all authority, which is why he is the firm foundation, which is why we can place our faith and our hope and our trust, and we can be confident when we live lives that are built on the rock, this solid foundation, because he is supreme and there's no one higher. And there's no one greater. There's nothing more powerful in heaven or on earth than Jesus. See, Jesus is first in all things. Matthew 19:26. It says, with man, it is impossible. Maybe whatever you're facing right now feels impossible. With man, it is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. Because Jesus is supreme. So there's really nothing too difficult. There's no pain too great, no hurt, no disappointment. There's no challenge that is too big for a supreme God of the universe. Second reason to make Jesus first in your life today. One more, not much time left. You might not know, I have a clock in the back. Sometimes I look at it. Not a lot of time left, but let me give you one more reason to make Jesus first in your life. Reason number 3, Jesus is enough. We sung a great song this morning talking about how Christ is enough. And I love that song. Colossians 1:19, it says, "For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him," Jesus, "and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." You see, my friends, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter how far from God you might feel in this moment, the message of the gospel is that Jesus is enough. That Christ is our all in all. That when we look to him and we turn our attention from the things of the world and onto this great God who governs all these things, doesn't mean the pain goes away. Doesn't mean the challenge dissipates immediately. But what it does mean is that we can move through these things with the authority and the confidence and the power of God in us. I don't know about you, but that's what I want. It's not just what I want, that is what I need living in our culture, living life this side of heaven. You see, God was pleased. I love that. With all joy, he was pleased to have his fullness, all of who God is, dwell in his Son. Not the one he created, but the prototype for which all other things exist. See, the message of the gospel is that you and I, we could never do enough good stuff to outdo or undo all the bad stuff that we've done. It's why God sent his Son, Jesus, to do for us what we could never do for ourselves. Because Jesus plus nothing equals all things for us. When you make Christ, when you make Jesus first in your life, I'm guaranteeing it will absolutely, fundamentally change everything for you. And so this morning, as we close, I want to pray for you, but I want you to think about this question. And I want you to consider it before God this morning, not because Pastor Aaron told you to, but think about this question. Is Jesus first in my life right now? Like, am I yielding and giving him all authority and placing him on the seat of authority in my life? Are you trusting in his strength right now? Is Jesus first in your life? Can we consider this before God? Can you close your eyes? Let's all bow our heads this morning. You might be here, and maybe you've been walking with God for a year, or 2, or 10, or 50. But just like this little church and the people of this church in Colossae, maybe if you're honest, you might say, I'm struggling in some area to put Jesus first. And so I'm missing some of his power. Maybe I'm missing some of his authority. And if that's you this morning, I want to pray for you. right where you sit, every eye closed, every head bowed. If that's you, you'd like me to pray for you this morning, just slip up your hand. Great. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, this morning, as we look at your word, this important letter penned by the Apostle Paul, Colossians chapter 1, and we hear of the authority of Jesus, and we start to understand just a little bit more of who Jesus is and his power and his purpose. God, this morning I am praying for your people right where they sit. I don't know what they're going through. I don't know what they're experiencing, but I know that Jesus, you are trustworthy. That Jesus, when we place our hope and faith in you, that these things begin to well up in us. So I pray for your people that they might know your peace, that they might know your presence, that they might know an extra measure of your power in these days, the power for life and the power for salvation. You might be here this morning, and as you sit before God today, you might recognize that you don't have Jesus at all. See, maybe you've been running from God. Maybe you've been hiding from God. Maybe you feel your sin is too great, that God can't forgive you. But this morning, I want you to know that Jesus is enough. See, Jesus plus nothing equals everything. And so this morning, if you've walked into this place, you don't even know how you got here. Maybe you're watching online today. And if you're ready to stop running, if you're ready to acknowledge your sin before God, I guarantee God is prepared to forgive you of your sin, to wash you clean, to place you on a brand new path and a life that is only possible through Him. If that's you this morning, I want to pray for you. Right where you sit, this is probably the most important prayer you'll ever pray. And so on the count of 3, I'm just going to ask you to slip up your hands. Every eye is closed, every head is bowed. If that's you, I'll lead you in a very simple prayer this morning. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Great. In the front. On the left. On the left. Others, you want to make Jesus Lord of your life and ask Him to come in and forgive you of your sin. Anybody else? Right where you sit, if this is the desire of your heart, whether you raised your hand or not, just begin to talk to God. And maybe say something like, Jesus, today I acknowledge that I am a sinner, that I cannot do anything on my own to make peace with God. And so, Jesus, I ask that you would come into my life, that you would wash me clean from my sin, and that you would help me to live in the power and the authority of God in my life today and for the rest of my days. Oh God, we, your people, we celebrate, we glory, we honor you, for your name is the name that is above all names. Yours is the power. Yours is the greatness. Yours is the victory and the majesty. And we give you all the glory. And all God's people said, amen.
Well, as we finish up, I want to encourage you, if you raised your hand to receive Christ today, your best first step that you can do is tell somebody. Maybe somebody that you came with, somebody who's nearby you, and just let somebody know. Our prayer team is down front. We would love to spend some time and pray with you. Again, if there's something going on in your life that you need prayer for, we invite you to do it. I want to just highlight 2 quick things here as we close up here. November 17th, we have our Friendsgiving great opportunity for us as a church family to come together, spend Thanksgiving together. We need more turkeys, so make sure sign up for turkeys. It's going to be a thin Thanksgiving otherwise, so make sure somebody signs up to try to be Pastor Don and our turkeys. We'd love for you to be a part of that, as well as we have our Love Your Neighbor outreaches that are in the lobby out there on your way out. We have 2 that are going on right now. On November 19th, we'll be packing boxes of Thanksgiving meals that we will pack together, and we will deliver those. We need people to sign up to both pack those boxes as well as deliver. If you can't make that, we'd also want you to consider donating $35, which is the cost of the boxes themselves, of all of the meals, as well as we are launching today a toy drive. And so you'll see a sled out there. There's some more information on your way out that we'll be having a toy drive for the 1st of December. So a lot of ways for us as a church family to plug in. Finally, the last thing I want to say is that on November 20th, please mark your calendars. That is right after our Thanksgiving time here, November 20th, right after the service. We will be decorating for Christmas and the whole Christmas season. And so a great chance for us as a church family, again, to come together and spend that time as a family, just decorating the place and enjoying those times. Hope you guys have had an amazing week, an amazing time here meeting with God. Can't wait to see you next week. See you guys.